Thank you so much, Andrew. Isn't he such a blessing? I just like, organizations take on the temperament of the leader. And I always said you could go into a congressional office and I don't have to talk. I can just walk in and I can stand there and I can get a sense as to what kind of person that is. And if you see lots of fourth grade drawings all over the wall and you see people smiling, you know what that, and if you go in there and it's quiet and it's dark, and you just get a sense of people. And when this operation is filled with people who love the Lord, love each other, love helping one another. It's just fun for me to be here, and I thank you so much for the honor of having been invited. As I told Andrew, most of my 4th of Julys are in the sun on the back of a convertible, usually 2 or 3 times. And so to be here in air conditioning, I'm just happy as a pig in slop. So we're going to talk about the 4th of July, and we have limited time, so let's go, because this is a spot that people across the globe would crawl over cut glass and barbed wire and float in leaky boats just to be where we are. And so we need to understand what it is. You understand that if a company on one side, if a car dealership on one corner and a car dealership on another corner, one's prospering and one's failing, there's a reason. If there's a factory on one corner and a factory on another corner, one's failing, one's succeeding, if a church on one corner and a church on another corner, one's failing, there's a reason. When there's a country on one side of a river that's prospering and a country on the other side of the river that's failing, there's a reason. And it's important that we know why that is, because when we do things that destroy that, it's just not a right thing to do. What about this place? 4% of the population of the world call themselves Americans. Every year they write more books, more plays, more symphonies, more copyrights, more inventions than the other 96% combined. Why? For thousands of years, people hoped to someday fly. It was Americans that invented the airplane and the light bulb and the telegraph and the telephone, the global positioning system. If you put a collar with a little chip in, a little girl in Poland, in Warsaw, loses her puppy dog, she can take an iPhone, go on the internet, through the GPS, find exactly where her puppy dog is, all of it conceived, invented, and maintained by Americans. Half of all the people on earth live on less than $2 a day. Half of those live on less than $1 a day. The second richest spot on earth is Western Europe, France, Germany, Britain. In America, we have a level below which we will not permit a person to sink. You come here, wave your foreign flag, put your feet up on the gripe and complain about the country. We will bury you with stamps for food, a roof over your head, a bed to sleep in, unlimited health care for you and anybody you've ever met, unlimited education. A person living in poverty in America, this is not my opinion, this is the Rector study done by the Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal, done every 24 months for the past 37 years. A person living in poverty in America is more likely to have a telephone, a television, an air conditioner, an automobile, eats more meat, and has more square footage space than the average resident of the second richest spot on earth, Western Europe. The question would be, why? This place blesses people as none other. All over the world there are skyscrapers. Why? Because an American named Elisha Otis invented the elevator. And there are places where it's 100, 120 degrees. Why? Because an American named Willis Carrier, God love him, invented the air conditioner. They made a ship parking in Singapore at this very moment is using a GPS, a global positioning system conceived, invented, and maintained by Americans. No other nation on earth could send men to the moon. As they circle the moon, would read that in the beginning it was God who created the heavens and the earth. As they land on the moon, would take communion in recognition of Christ shedding his blood for all mankind. There's never been a place like this place. And whenever anybody's in trouble, who do they call? When a ship is attacked on the high seas, has happened over 300 times last year, has happened repeatedly in the last month, as you've seen, to whom do they appeal? The 327,000 Americans that wear the uniform of the United States Navy. If it weren't for them, there would be no peace or stability. You couldn't take your yacht and go across the Mediterranean for fear that somebody would get you, but they know that there's Americans. Now, as a result, America has done good for people, and it blesses folks, and that puts it in the line of fire. And I'll just tell you this, quite frankly, America's not under attack because it's evil. America's under attack because it's good. 85 cents out of every dollar that goes for the cost of global evangelism. My daughter spent a year in Rwanda, where 80% of the people are Hutu, 20% are Tutsi, 80% tried to kill the 20% and chopped 1 million people to death in 90 days. And so the Americans have come in to try to bring some stability. And I went to visit her, and she would go down the street. She stopped in a little flower shop, and she ordered some flowers and said wanted to pick them up on the way back because she wanted to have them on the table for her parents. When she walked out, she said, only an American can do that. They wouldn't trust anybody else to order flowers and not pay for them in advance. But they know that an American will keep its word. It can go 85 cents out of every dollar. If you took all the money that goes for global evangelism, the people that are reaching the outreach to share the gospel, if you took the entire planet, put it all in a pile, and you increased it 2, 3, 4, 5.5 times, that's still not as much as Americans give. This is the lighthouse for the gospel. This is the place. Scripture says if you want to take a city, you have to bind a strong man. There's only one strong man in the world. It's the United States of America. You take America down, the rest of it is a piece of cake. Israel won't last a month. The fact is, we are, as they call Israel, the little Satan, they call America the great Satan. America is under attack because it stands for righteousness. And when Christians separate themselves aside and allow this great lighthouse for the gospel to be turned over to people that don't approve of what we're doing, then we see what happens in South LA and in Chicago, where 52 people were shot last Saturday and Sunday. That's what happens when man abandons God. And so you and I need to be a part, and our founders didn't want us to make an error. Now, how do you run a country? Moses was given instruction. He was trying to do it all by himself, and God said, no, you got to get people to help you. You got to people at local, state, and federal government, people, heads of tens, hundreds, and thousands, and they have to do 3 things. I can't give you a whole course like Richard Harris on government. I can only give you this much. Here's what you got to do. Number 1, somebody that fears God. Now, fear is the old English term for respect or honor. You fear the king. You honor the king. Now we would say honor God, but that meant that you had to respect God. Why? Because there are only 2 worldviews. One of them is that there's a God. And every question, every barroom brawl, every schoolyard scuffle boils down to who says, and it's either I say or God says. Those are the only 2 options. So do you think that a marriage is between 3 men and a horse? And without a protection of right and wrong, if the definition is only by the majority, they can call it a hate crime for you to laugh at their definition of marriage. When man abandons God, there is no freedom. And we see it happening with a vengeance coming at us very rapidly. That's why it's time for us to stand up, because we have 55 million votes, elects the president, 100 senators, 435 House members, 50 governors, every member of the legislature, every member of Congress. There are 75 million self-identified evangelicals. Those are people who say that they have a personal relationship with Christ, attend church once a month or more, and believe the Bible is the Word of God. That's a pretty general. There are 75 million of those, of which half of them are not registered to vote. That means that they've never voted, that they cannot vote. Now, let me tell you, registering to vote is extremely complicated. You can go online, you can go into the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, you can do anything. You have to know 3 things. You have to know your name, you have to know where you live, and your signature, and your birthday. And if you can do those 3 things, unless you say I'm from a foreign country, then you just vote anyway. But if you're from an American, then you're going to have, you got to do those 3 things. If Americans were, if just 5 million of the 45 million evangelicals that don't show up. If just 5 million of us showed up, we could take this country back in a minute. And there are people all over the world that they constantly pray. I mentioned in 2016 during the presidential election, I did 5 presidential prayer breakfasts in 5 different countries. And in those prayer breakfasts, when they had the representatives of the legislature speak and of the diplomatic corps and of the administration and folks and the business folks, as they would get to pray, they always prayed for American leadership in the election, that God would bless them to do the right thing, because they know they are only protected when America is strong. And so but there's nothing they can do about it. But you and I can. And if we don't, I fear we might have to give an answer for it. And so who says? All right, there's only 2 ideas. How do you feel about abortion? Well, I think, or God says. Those are the only 2 options. Now, because man wants to be God, that's the fight. Anybody has a 2-year-old understands how this is. I want to be in charge. I want to do it my way. Don't eat of the tree. Well, I saw that was good for eating. Make me smart, and it's good for food. I don't care what you say. I want to do it my way. And all of us face that question sometime during our life. Americans, when it was founded, they said, no, we're going to have a country that doesn't say what I think. We're going to do what God says. And so the difference is that if you believe, either you believe that man created God, or you believe that God created man. That's it. If you're God, then you're the boss, and you listen to him for 90 minutes, you can figure it out. The Bible said, as you saw, you don't want to mess with people who do not fear God. So let me just tell you, a rule of thumb. You don't want to marry a person who thinks they're God.
That's right.
Let me just tell you.
That's good.
You don't want to go into business with a person who thinks they're God. You don't want to elect a person who thinks they're God. And if you look at Denver, and they say, do I want to do what I say, or do I want to do what God says? These people think they're God. And they're trying to operate things their way. And that's the only 2 questions any place in the world. So either believe that, if you believe that man is God, then he has his own standard. If you believe that God created man, you believe God has a standard. If you believe that man is his own standard, then man has to be good. By what standard would he not be good? I mean, this is complicated. But if God has a standard, we fall short, and that makes them mad. That's what they don't like. And actually, God put a little of that inside of us, a conscience, and they know what they're doing wrong. That's why they get mad, and why they go scream at people and yell and stand up, because they can sense where truth is. My wife and I speak at family marriage conferences, and one of our first ones was a place in Oregon, and the fellow was telling us about that they have this Wiccan festival where these people come in from Seattle and elsewhere, and all these people pretend like they're witches and dragons and things. And so they just went downtown. There's a beautiful little park in the middle, and then the buildings were around there, and they were just sitting there in the park, sitting on the park bench, praying, minding their own business. A bus arrived from Seattle. These people got off of the bus, came charging across there, ran up to those people. We know why you're here. We know why you're here. They didn't know a soul, hadn't said anything. But there is a battle that goes on, and that's why they either believe that man is in charge, and then if man is his own standard, anything that goes wrong is not his fault. It has to be the society's fault. So if somebody comes in here and starts shooting people, can't be his fault. He's good. You know that poor fellow. He was a good man. He's just a wonderful child. No, it can't be his fault. It's got to be the gun. That's terrible, those guns coming in here doing those things. We need to regulate that gun. And those people sit down there in Denver and say that like it makes any sense. If guns kill people, how does anybody ever get out of a gun show alive? And yet we understand that man is responsible. And here's the most important. From where do rights come? Now, when you vote for someone or when you deal with someone, you need to know this. Where do rights come from? We have a misunderstanding about democracy. America is not a democracy. It never has been, and it's not in any of our founding documents, because in a democracy, rights come from the majority. So if the Hutu want to kill the Tutsis, they can. America doesn't do that. It is a republic, and our rights don't come from the majority. Our rights come from God. So there are no women's rights. There are no Hispanic rights. There are no African American rights. There are no rights to health care. There are no blonde, left-handed rights. There's only rights that come from God to us. Now, we democratically elect people to the republic for which it stands. What kind of government have you given us, Dr. Franklin? A republic, ma'am, if you can keep it. We democratically elect people to run the republic, and so we mess it up by calling ourselves a democracy. But if you vote in America 95-5 to kill Jews, can't do it. Not in America, because our rights don't come from the majority, they come from God. And what are those rights? We know what they are. Well, this is the way I got ahead of, I'm going to come back in a minute where the rights come from. The first and most important is life, but we got to do this first. If you believe that man is in charge, then he always wants more government. He's going to figure out ways to tell you what to do. He will decide, I don't care if some little 9-year-old makes up the figures and says that plastic straws are killing the whales in Alabama. They will then pass a law to tell you what to do. These people always want more government. We believe in more freedom. How do you get more government? Easy. Just take the money I take away from you, the less freedom you have. I can take enough of money that you couldn't leave this state. I can take enough that you couldn't leave this town. The more I take away from you, the less freedom you have. And so they always want to have more taxes. These people want fewer taxes. These people want a strong defense. We want a weak defense, and then we want a strong defense. Now, this is where we go apart. Katie Couric always says, now, you conservatives, you always claim you want limited government, and you want fewer taxes, but you always vote for defend. You're exactly right, madam. It works like this. See, a limited government protects our freedom. Fewer taxes protects our freedom. A strong defense protects our freedom, and that's what government is supposed to do. It's not supposed to tell me what time to get up in the morning. It's supposed to keep me free. And then the final is of a person's definition of diversity. Let me just tell you, diversity is destructive. Diversity causes chaos. Do you know what a huddle is in a football game? They go back there to prevent diversity. Don't you be doing your thing and you're doing your thing. We're all going to do this together, right? And diversity, the first thing that you do in the military, the first thing you do in it is to do away with diversity so that you can stand and work together. And Americans were American. We came here to be an American. So, as a team, as opposed to constantly adding these other names. Then we go, those that fear God, those that are men of truth. And the standard is, where does truth come from? There has to be, the standard comes from God. It's either what you say or I say. And let me just jump on that for a quick second. That is that truth reveals error. So error hates truth. So I can say this platform is 40 feet wide. You can say it's 45. You can say it's 51. If someone comes and measures it and it's 35, everyone in the room knows that we're wrong. So we hate the person that said it was 35. So we don't want them to do that. So you can have every lame-brained idiot in the planet come to college to speak on a college campus, to say the most bizarre things in the world. They can say that this, at the debate for President of the United States last week, a former cabinet member said that we should pay for abortions for transgender women which means it's a man, and he said you should pay for his abortion, and nobody challenged him, certainly not the media or the people running with him. See, when man forgets God, then he's all over the place. and professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. And so our founders understood that. I could easily get distracted here. Forgive me. So the next step, let me just say one more thing about truth, if I can, about men of truth. See, truth not only reveals error, truth overcomes error. So if we're in a court case and this guy's being charged with having stolen an ATM machine, and his defense counsel gets up, oh, he wouldn't do that. He loves his mother, and he was out in Oregon having dinner with his sister, and here's the receipts from the hotel, and oh, this is just really terrible. You don't care what she says, because when she's done, you're going to show a security camera. And you'll see his little pickup coming up there, and you'll see him get out and put a chain around the ATM, and you'll see him pull it out, and you'll see him lean over the ATM, and he's got his picture on the video, and you'll see his fingerprints as he pushes it, and the truth will overcome the error. Therefore, her only hope is she has to prevent the presentation of truth. I object. We can't. So we're going to shout. We're going to scream. We're going to spray paint people. We can't have that person on the college campus. Now, we had every idiot on the planet of the college campus. We can't have that person. Why? Because they can smell truth at 100 miles. And truth overcomes error. Now, what is the definition of truth? Pilate asked him, what is truth? I am truth. When I was a teenager, I didn't know what that meant. That meant that what he says is true. What man says is opinion. So when I say this is 35 feet wide, that's an opinion of mine. Truth is when you actually measure it. There has to be a standard. And God is the standard. So when Christ says, I am truth, everything else is just opinion. Therefore, I can pray in the name of Mother Earth or eagle feathers, and nobody cares. But if I pray in the name of Jesus Christ, all hell breaks loose. Oh, they just scream and yell. Why? Because truth overcomes error, and error hates truth. Okay, quick. I am so hating covetousness. I am so far behind. I got to go fast here. This is very, very important. 3 things. God said, I don't have time to give you a course in it. Here's 3 things. Either I'm God or you are. Number 2, you can't be making this up on your own. It's got to be what God says. And 3rd, now listen, he's only got 3 things. Hating socialism.
That's right.
Socialism is wanting what somebody else has, and either going and taking it, or collectively getting a group of people to use the IRS to come and take it from them and give to you. Either way, it's the same. And it creates poverty. Let's do it very quickly. A car is driving down the highway out here. There's only 2 ways I can get money out of that person's pocket. Only 2. One is called free enterprise. That is where I lay awake nights, figuring out ways to do something good for that person, such that they'll slam on the brake and pull in and say, oh, you're going to wash my car and clean off the dash and vacuum the carpet. Oh, that's wonderful. I'd much rather have that than have this $10 bill. I'd much rather have that pair of shoes than have this $60. A global positioning unit, $200. I never get lost again as long as I live. I'd much rather have that than have this $200. And under free enterprise, we figure out ways to do good things for people such that the two make an exchange, which at the end of the exchange, they are both better off. And if not, they don't make the exchange. They are both wealthier than they were. They have created wealth. And that's the only way that wealth is created. So in America, you come here, you and I cannot go to Mexico and go in the oil business. Why? Because under socialism, which is government control, rich people have made deals with the government, and they control the trucking, and they control the telephones, and they control the restaurants, and they control the thing, and you and I can't do that. So if you're poor in a socialist country, you have no hope. So you hate the rich because under socialism, they have deals. In America, you can float in here from Southeast Asia into the harbor in Long Beach, California at 8 in the morning. You can own 5 7-Elevens by midnight. Because in America, you are rewarded under free enterprise, and here's the distinction. Under free enterprise, I'm rewarded not because of who I am, but because of what I do for others. And the greater the contribution, the greater the reward. 5 cups of coffee, 1 reader, 5,000 cups, or 50,000 cups, the greater the And so in America, we honor people who are wealthy. Because in America, the way you become wealthy is to bless more people. And you have 100 acres, or you have 1,000 acres, you have 10,000. The more people you bless, and the more wealth you create, the more people you can hire. Under social, I said there are 2 ways to get money out of that car. There's only one other way. It's called coercion. Just go take it. Stop at the street corner, come up, put a gun in the window. I want half of everything in your purse. And we call that person a criminal. When they take the money out of the purse, have they created any wealth? No. Have they redistributed wealth? Yes, from her purse to your pocket. But they haven't created any wealth, and the degree to which you are benefiting is the degree to which she's diminished. So no wealth has been created. So when a person says, I'm going to take over in Venezuela, I'm going to take all the money from those dirty oil companies, and I'm going to give it to you, and so they take it from the productive, and they give it to the unproductive, they're happy until finally everything runs out, and it falls apart. It only does that every time. And yet you would think, when you listen to some of these people running for president, it's terrible the way wealth is distributed in this country. And you vote for me, because I understand. I went to Moscow for my wedding, and I never held a job until I got elected to Congress, and now I'm a U.S. Senator, and now I can be President of the United States. I was 42 years old, still living out of my broken-down Volkswagen bus, but now I finally got snookered into getting elected in Congress, and now I'm a millionaire, and I can tell you what the trouble in America is the way that wealth is distributed. And you and I are already smart enough to know that that's foolish. It's like the person driving west, and they get to Iowa, and all they see on both sides of the roads is corn, as far as you can see, mile after mile after mile. Then they get to Nebraska, and all they see is wheat, mile after mile after mile. Then they get to Colorado, and all they see is beef and hills and mountains. And they go to a speech in Denver and say, isn't it terrible the way that corn is distributed in this country? And then any farmer with this much brain power says, you idiot. Corn's not distributed. Corn's grown. Wealth isn't distributed. Wealth is created. And if this guy's working 80-hour weeks and this guy's working 10-hour weeks, he's going to have more wealth than that guy. And don't you stand up here, Mr. Senator, and tell me it's terrible the way it's exactly the way. How do people? They voluntarily reach in their pocket and reward the person that blesses them. However, let's don't call that person that sticks his gun in the window and takes half your money a criminal. Let's call him a congressman. Let's call him a Detroit city councilman who takes the richest city in the history of mankind and says, if you have the audacity to come through my city, I'm going to tax you to death. And so people say, I promise not to do that. So the population of Detroit is now lower than it was in 1900. Why? Because politicians use the police power to steal taxes, the power to destroy, as James Madison said, and made them poorer. Now, that is called covetousness. And we used to have it on the walls of every school. And you know what? It's going to come back again. I'm going to talk, that's in the next hour. But that's what makes America different. When, as you know, when you travel abroad, people want to come up and say, I've been to America. My wife is a gregarious sort. She would also ask people, what surprised you about America? Or what impressed you or startled you about America? The answer that comes back more than anything else is, in America, you don't have walls around your property. Everybody else has walls around your property. You don't know where your yard stops and where your neighbor begins. Why? Because in America, we don't covet what that person has. We drive by and see a beautiful home. We say, someday I want to have a house like that. Someday I want to have a car like that. I am now halfway through, and I have 5 minutes left to go. So here's the quickie. If you understand this for the rest of your life, you will be able to bless your children and your grandchildren. Here it is. Here's 90% of all the politics you'll ever need to know. Let us say that represents 100% of your income, 100% of the income of a city or a state or a nation. Let us say it's $100 bill. And you go to Walmart, and the most expensive thing in the store is $99. That means you are completely free to choose anything in the store. Let us suppose someone comes along and takes half of it away, or takes a fourth of it away from you. What happens? Two things happen. Number one, you have fewer choices. There are some things that you can no longer choose. Thomas Jefferson said freedom is having choices. The more choices I take away from you, the less freedom you have. Anybody ever raised a teenager has had this debate. And the more money I take away from you, the lower your standard of living. If you're not a politician, this is clairvoyant, and you can see this easily. But, if you're New York Times, this is a profundity. And so let us suppose someone comes along and takes half of it away from you. What happens? Fewer choices, less freedom, lower standard of living. Suppose someone comes along and takes 3/4 of it. Same thing. Suppose someone comes along and takes it all. That person is called a slave. Now, who can take money away from you? Two people, criminal or a politician. And here's the point. This is all you need to know as to how to vote the rest of your life. For a city or city. The greater the freedom, the greater the wealth, the greater the government, the greater the poverty, and you can make any rich place poor or any poor place rich. And that's all politics is. Which direction do we go on that scale? When Margaret Thatcher took over, England was in a state of collapse. The International Monetary Fund had taken over the pound sterling. It was becoming a third world country. She cut taxes, gave more and more freedom. The country took off. When she left as prime minister, it was the fourth richest nation on earth. Now, you can do that, and that's what you and I need to understand as to how to do it. South Korea, North Korea, same heritage, same language, same climate, same everything, except South Korea has freedom, the 10th largest GDP in the world. North Korea has socialism, the poorest country on earth. So Japan is the fourth richest nation on earth. This is number 2. This is what Japan looked like at the end of World War II. It got freedom, and that's what Nagasaki looks like today after having been bombed into oblivion. That's sugar. So in the third State of the Union address, one of the reasons that we had the Constitution was because the dollar was worthless and the whole thing was falling apart financially. People in North Carolina wouldn't take the money from the people in South Carolina, and so they rioted and all. So they met back in Philadelphia and ended up writing a Constitution of the United States. One of the provisions was the president had to give a State of the Union address, report on the nation at least once a year. On the third State of the Union address from George Washington. Now remember, money wasn't worth a continental. The continental money was worthless. Now, 3 years later, it says, the United States enjoy a scene of tranquility and prosperity under the new government could hardly have been hoped for. Our public credit, which is the value of the dollar, stands on a high ground, which 3 years ago, it would have been considered a species of madness to have foretold. In other words, if I would have told you 3 years America would have the strongest currency in the world, you would have said I was crazy. What is my point? My point is you can make any poor place rich or any rich place poor if you understand the principles that make this work. Okay, we don't have time for the rest. Let's go to closing, and that is this. John Adams said, if you don't have a godly standard, none of this works. How do we know? We know it's true. Liberia took our Constitution and tried to implement it in Africa. And Liberia is one of the poorest places on earth. Why? Because they steal, and they lie, and they cheat. And without the moral and religious understanding, it doesn't work. So anybody that tells you, I don't want religion in politics, you have to have two things. You have to have a godly standard, and you have to have a free economic system. It takes both. Conservatives want high integrity and low cost of government. Liberals want low integrity and a high cost of government. And that's all we do is turn those two dials. And the more you go like this, which is North Korea, which there is no right or wrong except what the leader says, and I take all your money under communism, that's poverty. So that's what we do back and forth. And now that you know that, you can drive from here to California, you can tell in a city or a state, you can tell how it's going. And it's the same applies to countries. So let's go to the French wanted to do this without God. Liberty, equality. We had life, liberty. They didn't need the life part. They didn't have the God part. So it was just liberty. Liberty, then they want equality, always talking about equality. How do you get equality? You take from one person and give to another. What happens when you do that? They object. What do you have to do? You have to kill them. And so the standard for the French Revolution was the guillotine. It happens Pol Pot in Cambodia, 2 million killed. Anybody who had eyeglasses or owned a foreign car, anybody who had an education. 100 million under Mao Zedong in China, 65 million under Stalin, 13 million under Hitler, 6 million Jews, 6 million Christian Catholic priests and others. They always, man without God always ends up killing. God is who gives us life, and that's why it's important that we continue to do that. All right. So, George Washington said, what is required for political prosperity, for your government to work, you have to have religion and morality, indispensable supports. Let us with caution, in the supposition that morality can be maintained without, the supposition, that's a gracious way of saying, don't try to tell me the idea. The reason and experience, common sense tells us to forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in the exclusion of religious principle. That's why they want to shut down the churches. That's why they want to take the Bible out of the schools, all that sort of thing. As I say, we're going to turn that around very shortly. I mentioned about America being the hope for the world, and as a result, it's under attack. And so when they wanted to destabilize the freedom that the world was moving toward in the 1980s and 90s, they decided to attack America. But remember who Americans are. Ronald Reagan, when he became president, he said, you know, for the last 25 years, our enemies have had the capacity to put nuclear weapons on missiles and shoot us. What do we do about that? I said, oh, nothing. I said, well, that's not a very good program. I said, well, we can destroy them afterwards. Well, can't we do something better than that? I think we ought to shoot it down before it gets here. And they said, you can't do that. You can't hit a bullet with a bullet. And Ronald Reagan's response was, we're Americans. In short order, they were able to do it. We gave it to Israel to protect it. But every president, everyone that's run for president on their side of the aisle for the past 20 years has wanted to prevent that from happening. And we had it almost completed in 2009. We came within 3 months. And the new president that was elected at the time, Barack Obama, the final step is, you know, you have latitude, longitude, and altitude. You have to have a triangulation. And the radars were going to be in Czech Republic, and the missiles were going to be in Poland, and ours were in Alaska, etc. And right in March, they were to be operative in May, and President Poland said not. And so now, when Guam was being threatened a year and a half ago by the North Koreans, you saw that President Trump sent ships out to protect it because we have short-range missiles. But we couldn't do the long-range missiles because the people on the left don't want us to protect ourselves. So, recognizing that America needs a strong defense, and if you take down America, the rest of it's natural. Some guys in a cave decided they wanted to take down our financial system. And so they decided to attack America. They decided to hijack some planes. Now, we had hijackings before, but everybody wanted to live, and so they would take it to Cuba or someplace. But these guys were different. They wanted to die. And so they flew planes into the Trade Center and killed them and everyone else involved. And other planes that they were going to kill people on, when they got the word through the telephone, they told them that what had happened. And now there's nobody to lead. Just Americans have to do what is in their best interest. And so they met together, and this is what Americans did with something that never happened before. This is never done before. What do we do? How do we protect the rest of the people? Just like in World War II, when Battle of the Bulge, when Hitler ran over top of everybody and they lost their command and control and the Americans were left behind the lines, they just went ahead and said, we know what to do. We're going to blow up that dump over there. We're going to take out that bridge. They said that during the Second World War, the Allies had a secret weapon. It was the American GI, a person that could think and act for himself, and raised under the principles of having freedom. So at 9:57, the passenger assault began. Several passengers had terminated their phone calls with loved ones in order to join the revolt. One of the callers ended her message by saying, "Everyone's running to first class. We've got to go. Goodbye." The cockpit voice recorder captured the sounds of the passenger assault, muffled by the intervening cockpit door. In response, Jara immediately began to roll the plane to the left and the right, attempting to knock the passengers off balance. This is from the 9/11 report. At 9:58:57, Jara told another hijacker in the cockpit to block the door. He continued to roll the plane sharply left and right, but the assault continued. At 9:59:52, Jara changed tactics and pitched the nose of the plane up and down to disrupt the assault. The recorder captured the sounds of loud thumps, crashes, shouts, and breaking glass and plates. At 3 seconds after 10, Jara stabilized the plane. 5 seconds later, he asked, "Is that it? Shall we finish it off?" A hijacker responded, "No, not yet. When they all come, we will finish it off." The sounds of fighting continued outside the cockpit. Again, Jara pitched the nose of the aircraft up and down. At 10:26, a passenger in the background said, "Into the cockpit. If we don't, we'll die." 16 seconds later, a passenger yelled, "Let's roll." We know who it was. They met, they prayed, and they said, "We have to act." They had nothing to defend themselves, but they knew that what they had to do. Jara stopped the violent maneuvers at 1 minute after and shouted, "Allah is the greatest, Allah is the greatest." He then asked another hijacker, "Is that it? I mean, shall we put it down?" To which he replied, "Yes, put it down, pull it down." The passengers continued their assault, and at 2:23, a hijacker said, "Pull it down, pull it down." The hijackers remained at the controls, but must have judged that the passengers were only seconds from overcoming them. The plane headed down, the control wheel was turned hard to the right, the airplane rolled onto its back, and one of the hijackers began shouting, "Allah is the greatest, Allah is the greatest." With the seconds of the passenger counterattack continuing, the aircraft plowed into an empty field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. A 580 mile per hour, only 20 minutes flying time from Washington, D.C. Jara's object was to crash his airliner into the symbol of the American Republic, the capital of the United States. He was defeated by the alerted, unarmed Americans of United Flight 93. July 4th, 1863, America came within 2.5 minutes of disappearing. Just as those individuals have fought for our defense time after time, and in the next session we're going to talk about that. But Joshua Chamberlain was a school teacher from Maine that wanted to protect America when the Confederacy decided to break apart into two countries. And in those days, the way that you became a colonel or a major, you showed up, and whoever got there first, you're the boss of the group. And so it wasn't that he'd had any military training, but he was the first one, and so he was the commander of the 20th Maine. Started out that summer with 1,000 men. They ended up in Gettysburg on July 3rd with only 90, and before the day was over, it would then be 30. But all of the resources have been scheduled, and it was the high water mark for the South. They've done everything they could. They now marched into the North, and all they wanted, they didn't want to overwhelm the United States. They wanted an armistice. They wanted a peace that would have two countries. And this was going to be the battle that did it. If they won this battle, the North was so distraught. They're having riots in Boston and New York against the war. They had been so unsuccessful so many times that Lincoln was losing support in every turn. If they lost this, the battle was going to be over. And so Lee put everything he could into it. And the little 20th Maine, they explained to him, they were on the high land here and on Seminary Ridge. On the southern part here is a place called Little Round Top. Now, Joshua, they're going to try to come around us. And if they do that and get behind us, the high ground is good unless you get surrounded, and that's bad. And if they come at you, they're then going to take the whole thing, and this whole line, 80,000 men that go back between here and Gettysburg, were finished, and so you can't lose that. And so on the morning of July 4th, the 15th and 40th Alabama began to attack, and they drove them back, and they did it again, and they drove them back 3 times. The 4th time, they were over the wall, and they were able to drive them back until now it's virtually all over. The North, the 20th Maine, has lost 2/3 of its men. It's lost all of its ammunition. It's about to get run over. So Joshua's brother, Thomas, comes up to him and says, we're gonna retreat, right? He said, no, we can't. He said, well, what can we do? And the major said, well, we don't have any ammunition. He said, well, take it from the dead and the wounded. We did that the last 2 times. We're out. We got nothing. He said, well, we can't quit. And his brother Tom starts to walk off. He says, watch for your brother James. With 3 of us in this battle, this can be a hard day for Mother. And with that, a shout from the 12-year-old scout at the top of the trees. He said, they're reforming. And a Texas regiment had joined them, and they're starting to attack again. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to lose this battle. If you lose the battle, you lose the war. And so he said 2 words, fix bayonets. He said, what? He said, fix bayonets. This man's going to charge. He said, fix bayonets. In fact, my friend Ron Maxwell made a movie called Gettysburg. Let's just see if we can watch how it looks in real time.
Sir, half my men are down. Most of the rest are wounded. Well, that's just 2 things.
How are we fixed for ammunition?
It's almost gone. Sir, we're running out. We don't have much left to shoot with. Some of the boys got nothing at all. Sir, what do we do for ammunition? Sir, my boys have bread muskets and they're firing back with them. Sir, we ought to pull out.
No, we can't do that.
We can't hold them again, sir. You know that.
Well, if we don't, they go on by and over the hill and the whole flank caves in.
Sir, here they come.
Well, we can't run away. If we stay here, we can't shoot. So let's fix bayonets. We'll have the advantage of moving down the hill. They got to be tired, the Revs. They got to be close to the end if we are. So fix bayonets. Ellis, you take the left wing, I'll take the right. I want a right wheel forward of the whole regiment.
What, you mean charge?
Yes, but here's what we do. We're going to charge swinging down the hill. Just like we pulled back this left side of the regiment, now we're going to swing it down. We swing like a door. We're going to sweep them down the hill just as they come up. Understand? Does everybody understand?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Ellis, you take the left wing, and when I give the command, I want the whole regiment to go forward, swinging down to the right.
All right, sir. Fine.
It's part 1.
Move. Left wing, right wheel.
Right wheel!
Charge. pistol.
The prisoner, sir.
Wait here.